Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ave Maria Press Professional Development Webinar Series. Our goal in this series is to provide parish staff and volunteers and diocesan ministers the formation, training, and tools needed to create vibrant Catholic parishes and growing ministries. In today's webinar, Jodi Hunt will explore cyberbullying and how we can help young people grow to be digital disciples. My name is Erin Pierce. I am the Parish and Curriculum Marketing Specialist at Ave Maria Press. Before we begin our webinar, we would like to recognize our webinar partners, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association of Catholic Family Life Ministers, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the Catholic Campus Ministry Association. Everyone in the audience is muted today, but you are able to ask questions. Questions may be sent to our presenter using the questions section of the GoToWebinar panel, which you can see displayed here, and I'll read as many of those as possible at the end of the presentation today. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to that recording will be sent to you later this week via email. With that, I would like to welcome and introduce our presenter today. Dr. Jodi G. Hunt holds a PhD in religious education from Fordham University, a master's degree in theology from Oblate School of Theology, and a bachelor's degree in anthropology from Texas A&M University. Dr. Hunt is a professor of ministry in the Neuhoff School of Ministry at the University of Dallas. Her research interests are focused upon digital and practical theology, youth and young adult ministry, and finding meaningful theological responses within the walls of the Catholic Church to the world outside them. Her work in these areas have led Dr. Hunt across the United States, teaching and training lay ecclesial ministers in various Catholic dioceses and parishes. Jodi, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and turn the controls over to you to make you the presenter.
And you can still see it, I'm assuming?
Not yet.
Okay, show my screen. Got it.
Yes, there we go. Okay, wonderful. I'll go ahead and close out my camera and come back on when you're all done. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you to Ave Maria for having me. Today we're going to look at ministering to the cyberbullied and the cyberbullies, which is actually formed out of my dissertation. To give you a little bit of background as how I landed on this, I have not been cyberbullied. I actually grew up in an era where social media was not around yet, thank goodness. Great blessing, I think, in my life. But one day I woke up as I was working with high schoolers, and they were constantly on their phones. I basically just woke up, and the idea struck me that this is perhaps something that needed to be addressed within the field of religious education. And so from there, I just sort of started to play with the idea. And as I began to really think about this too, I thought about perhaps we don't need to just think about those who are being bullied, but the cyber bullies themselves. It's because there's a lot of formation that needs to happen, because it does happen on both sides, and there's stories on both sides of this current issue. And I think there's a lot that ministers can do within faith formation, campus ministry, even being just a lay minister in a larger Catholic parish could do to help form our young people to be good digital disciples. So I'd like to start off with just take a couple of seconds to kind of think about what you personally hear when you see or hear the word cyberbullying. So what feelings or emotions arise within you when you hear or think of the word cyberbullying? Are you frustrated, maybe terrified because your young children are experiencing this? Maybe perhaps you're fearful of what's to come later on. Maybe you're angry because you see it so often, even among adults, adult Catholics in your community. So just think about those feelings and let them sit there a moment. And as you think about them and kind of flesh them out as you go through the presentation, the hope is that eventually you can come to a better understanding of what you can do to respond to those feelings within your own ministerial context and helping others become good digital disciples. I like to start. I'm a storyteller, so I like to start off with telling a couple of stories to really ground us into why this work is important. And this is a young girl named Mallory. And she was about 12 years old, and she began to become a victim of cyberbullying. It started off with just, as mean girls typically do around middle school age. She was singled out as being different from other girls. And so as they began to banter back and forth, they went from the playground onto the digital space. And some of the things that she received, as her mom reported, was that, why don't you just kill yourself? And things got really heightened and out of control. And she had the support of her family. I think that's really important to point out, is that a lot of these young people who are cyberbullied have great support in their communities. Sometimes they're dealing with emotional issues or other psychological things that they have to kind of, work through, that with mental health illness and things like that. And sometimes they don't. But what we see in a large part, a group of these people, these young people, is that they are really supported. They have parents who love them. They've been taken to counseling. In Mallory's case, her mother was still trying to figure out what to do. And one thing that she decided was that she was going to remove her from that context and put her in school. So she was in the process of working this out. She had been in contact with the school that she was at, but the cyberbullying kept going on and on and on. Eventually, Mallory Rose actually committed suicide. Her mother found her hanging in her room. And her obituary that her mother shared is that she said that she inspired, she was kind, she was innocent, she was beautiful. And this is just one of hundreds of stories that we see almost on a weekly basis here in America and even over the UK, in terms of young people who've committed suicide because they reached this breaking point where they can no longer take what has been throwing at them. What's interesting about cyberbullying, and as we flesh this out, and something to keep in mind, is that there's no escaping it. When I was a young kid, if I was bullied on campus or at this playground, I could go home into this great big world of my own solitude with the support of my family and friends. I didn't have to listen to the bullies, right? They may call or things like that from the telephone, but they weren't constantly hounding my cell phone or sending social media and putting things out in the world that other people would see. It was a very mutual, disengagement between the both of us. At the same time, though, we sort of transferred over, and the Mallory's world is that she never could escape that. She would go home, and the bullies would go at her and at her and at her on her cell phone. They would call her phone. They would put things out into social media that the rest of the school would see, and that becomes detrimental to the life. On the other side of it, though, we also have the cyberbullies, right? So this is Tyler Gregory, and he is actually a cyberbully. And what he did, he and his friends, for some reason, they decided that this one girl that was dating one of the boys in their larger friend group, they didn't like her. He's like, and when you read Tyler's story and he shares, he's like, I'm not really sure why I didn't like her. It's like, we just didn't like this girl hanging out with us. And so they began to go online and post specific things about her. And say awful, nasty, mean things about her. And over time, it escalated the same way that Mallory's case did, is that eventually one of the boys in the group had posted online, why don't you just go kill yourself? And that's actually a very quite common thing that young people say to each other digitally online. I've met young people through interviews and in terms of cyberbullying, and that was actually shared with me more than one occasion of that type of banter back and forth. But Tyler said that when that was posted, it really struck him, and he was like, so I can't do this, right? He's like, it's something within him, and good moral formation there, is that he said, like, this is wrong. We've crossed the limits, and I'm not going to partake in this. And so actually another young man who was part of his friend group actually said the same thing. And so they looked at each other and they said, let's stop this. Let's do something else positive and reform ourselves. And so they created the No Bull organization. So in the No Bull organization is that they sort of created, you can Google it and go online, and they create sort of like these video and artistic expressions of combating bullying, and they have contests each year that young people can take care of. For a long time, Tyler was a spokesperson, and now they've sort of switched the spokesperson among people who have been bullies and people who've been cyberbullied. But according to Tyler, one interesting thing that I found in his story is his explanation of why he actually decided to bully. And he says it really was about fitting in, and it was about, just getting some laughs out of my friends, as messed up as that sounds. And so we think about the cyberbullies. It's not so much that they want to be vindictive and evil. They want to, cause great harm. Many of them are just kids being kids, and they find humor in what they're saying online. So a large part of our discussion today will be when we kind of unravel on how we can help the bullied and the cyberbullies is to think about how do we get them to just think and think about what they're posting online and what they're saying to each other online. And of course, a lot of this goes in the deep, deep rootiness is moral formation and the understanding of the dignity of the human person. So before we jump into the, so because I know you're here for helpful pointers and tips, Dr. Hunt, I know these type of stories. Tell me what should I do, right? I just want to point out some characteristics of cyberbullying, just so you understand it a little better, as opposed to different things that you may or may not see online. The first one is that the most common form of cyberbullying is person to text, which means that I'm texting you and you're texting me. That's the most common form. Again, I've been spending some time and research and interviewing young people in their digital lives. And over again, I ask them, like, where do you see cyberbullying? What does it happen? And over again, they tell me it happens in one or two places they see most often. It's in Snapchat and text to text. And they say text to text is probably the most common things that they hear about. Because other places, kids are savvy. They don't put things out in public space. So it really is the back and forth. The downside to this is that it's not in a public space. So we have no idea what our kids are telling us, right? We have no idea what they're saying to each other because they don't share everything that they say to each other. Your teen may be texting. You're like, oh, who you're talking to? Oh, no one. Right? And how many of you heard that? Right? Or what are they saying to you? Oh, nothing. And that's the answer we get from our young people. So just be aware of that, and that it happens far more often. And then, of course, the texts are sent out. Another thing is they do large group text, which I found is very interesting. And so oftentimes you'll have sort of the mob effect, where the group will turn on one or two people. And so instead of having just one person having a beef with somebody, it'll be the entire group who actually turns it. And this is detrimental, absolutely detrimental to a young person's life, especially when they're in that very early formative years of trying to find their way. And you want to be part of a group, right? And you want to be accepted as who you are. And the group turns on you, and that can be very emotionally devastating to a human person. The next thing is it's repetitive. One thing that I get all the time is like, oh, what about this politician? Or what about this celebrity? And aren't they a cyberbully? Not necessarily, right? You have to be repetitive. You have to go after the person over and over and over again. So trolling is different. You may have heard the term trolling, and trolling basically means that I may go through Twitter or may go through Snapchat, and I may see something that sparks my I don't know my sarcastic sense of humor, and I may spot off something to point something out on someone. It may be funny to me. They may not think it's too funny. Whatever happens between the two of us. But I may move on and never speak to that person again. That's trolling. That's not cyberbullying. Cyberbullying is repetitive. So if you have an instance of a person constantly getting hacked by one specific person over and over again, then you've elevated from trolling to cyberbullying. So remember that too. And I think young people sometimes are very quick to say, oh, they're bullying me, and they're screaming it. But it's like the boy who cried wolf, right? We have to be very careful in training our young people to understand the difference between being trolled and being bullied, because you're going to. And today we're focusing on those who are repeatedly attacked by one person or a group. That's cyberbullying. And how do we get other young people to stop being those type of people who go after someone over and over and over again in digital space? The next thing is often done, I mentioned this, but it's often done in groups. Usually it's not a single person. Sometimes it does become one-on-one interactions, negative interactions between two people, but usually it starts off with a group. If you think back to your young days of, being in the playground, right, and you have a group of kids that walk up to this other group kid and they kind of kick, throw stones at them or say certain things to them, it's usually done in a group setting. You may have one or two kids who later on sort of elevate it beyond, outside of that, where they kind of just keep going on and on and on. But usually this starts off in a group setting. Also, to point out, girls are 3 times more likely to be bullied online than men or young boys, which is an interesting stat. But that also goes back to the catty nature of females. They tend to use more verbal attacks. Boys are very physical. All right, I used to teach in an all boys school, and the boys would pound it out, and 2 seconds later they're giving each other high fives and they're over it. Girls tend to be more verbal, and they have attacks or beef with other people. And we've seen this sort of played out in digital spaces. So you will see elevated in your ministerial settings of girls who have to deal with cyberbullying at a higher rate than perhaps the boys do. It's also underreported. It's actually only about 20% of young people, according to the Cyberbullying Institute statistics, actually report being cyberbullied. And it's like 20% is nothing if you compare it to the great big world of young adult life. And so what researchers have begun to kind of think and flesh out through other qualitative analysis is that perhaps young people just aren't reporting it, and that's something very real. And so this is really a silent cultural thing. Even when I was talking to, again, going back to my interviews, the young people would say, I asked them, it's like, well, who do you tell? We don't tell anyone. Right? We know about it, but I'm like, do you report it? Do you say anything? And they're like, no, we don't report anything. It's just between us, right? And so even though the 20% statistic sounds like everything's going great online, it's actually, we believe that there's a whole subculture that we have yet to tap into. And finally, as we all know, it's emotionally, physically, spiritually destructive. And it is spiritually destructive. It really harms somebody's ability to trust, and to move into that spiritual realm, to break free. When you think about cyberbullies themselves, they become almost chained to that sin of slander against someone else, and it becomes a game for them, and how far they can push that envelope. So there's a lot of different things happening in terms of young people and their digital lives. So here's the big question: is like, what can ministers do? It's very simple, and some of you are going to see this and say, of course I know this, Dr. Hunt, I'm already doing this. And if that's you, I'm perfectly happy with that, because hopefully I can affirm what you're already doing and maybe give you some insights and the importance of keep doing what you're doing. I know you may never even thought about this, I never even thought about addressing cyberbullying in my own ministerial context. But what can we do is 3 very easy things. The first one is teach like Jesus. The second one is preach like a disciple. And the third is pray like the saints. So very, very simple. And I broke it down in simple so it's easy to remember. Teach like Jesus, preach like a disciple, and pray like the saints. Don't worry, we're going to go into more detail than that. So first we start off with teach like Jesus. So the very first thing is you need to know your audience. Right? Right now, and I've given other presentations on this before, is that we are still culturally, and you may have heard this banter back and forth between the baby boomers and millennials, and it seems like they're constantly fighting. But you may have heard that banter in our social media. But what about Generation Z? How well do you know Gen Z? How well do you know Gen group of young people, which are actually hitting about 5th or 6th grade right now? They're about to hit your ministry if you teach in middle school. How well do you know that group? We don't know them very well, right? We're doing better as a church and as ministers go and getting to know them. There's been some really great studies out there that have been done. I can suggest to you to get to know them. One study to look at is the Barnard Group, and they have it's BARNA, the Barnard Group, and they have a great booklet called Gen Z with all the statistics and things about in terms of Gen Z and their faith life and church attendance and things like that, and other cultural nuances. But you really need to know these kids. And young adults, because some of them are already in college, you need to know about their digital lives. Why do they pick up the cell phone? What do they do when they're on the games, right? What are they actually doing? Well, how do they speak to each other? What's their digital language, right? And so decoding all that will help you find better insight on what's going on, especially if you're looking in your own ministry and you suspect something's happening between maybe your core team, and you need to figure it out, but there's a whole code of language you don't fully understand. So knowing that language and this culture can help you better decipher whether or not someone is being a bully and whether someone is being cyberbullied. The next thing is you need to teach where young people are. And I'm going to reemphasize this over and over again. We got to stop being fearful of digital spaces. Go in there. right? Get on all the social media. I know it's overwhelming with how many. I mean, I could spend another 4 hours just going all the different social media, and I'm not even up to task in terms of what's out there now. I mean, it seems like every other day I'm coming across a new one that young people are using. But you need to go into those social media apps. You need to be a part of that community, just like Christ did, right? Christ didn't preach from the mountaintop and preach down to the rest of us. He actually went into the trenches and taught from the ground up. And that's what we have to do. If we're going to teach them good digital discipleship and how to be doing good things online and how to teach each other and share the community, we have to be in those trenches doing the same thing and modeling those things for our young people. Explore the heart of cyberbullying. And one of the things is like the question is never the question. And basically it means that sometimes what's happening with the cyberbully and if those who are being cyberbullied, what's really at the core usually is not what we see, right? So if I have someone and I've encountered someone online and they're bullying, and I see it over and over again that they're going after people, right? It could be on your social media site for your teen or your teen core or whatever it is, and I see that they're going back and forth and back and forth. I'm going to bring that kid in or that young person or even the adult that happens at the faith formation level. I'm going to bring them in. I'm going to say, what's going on in your life? What's happening, right? There's an underlying reason or some emotional tool that's really driving them. Usually cyberbullies are not doing it, they do it for sport, but when you really get underneath it, they're insecure, they're back their own demons, they're dealing with hard life issues at home. All these different things are going on, so I'm going to look for that. On the other side of somebody who's being bullied, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to bring them into my office. I'm going to sit down with them. I'm going to ask them how things are going. I would try to get down to the root or the core of where this began. Is it something that they started and banter back and forth? Is it because they went to a new school, or is it because if they wore the wrong jacket on the wrong day? Whatever it is, I'm going to ask them like what started this all and get down to that fundamental core, just like Christ did, right? If you think by one of my favorite stories, probably the favorite story I have of the Gospels, and it's when Christ meets the woman at the well. I love this story, right? And he calls her out, right? He doesn't just take her for face value. He actually calls her out and says, what you're doing is wicked, and I'm going to show you a new way, a new life, and you're going to put down your bucket and come follow me, and I'm going to free you from all this sin. And she does, and she follows him. But he doesn't just stop at the surface, right? And just say, oh, that's nice. I'm glad that, hopefully that works out for you. He gets down to the very, very deep, the fundamental deep root of what was going on in her life. And that's when he was able to unlayer and open up to see what was happening and to offer her a new opportunity, a new way of life. And we can do the same in cyberbullying. We also need to share and listen to stories. So if you're having a life night, an adult faith formation night, if you're working with parents or other youth, wherever context you are, share the stories, right? Christ used really bold, creative stories that struck people to get them to wake up and pay attention. And we need to be doing the same thing. It's pretty cool at thought, and I know many of us already do that. But think about parents too. Sometimes the best way we can reach young people is to get parents informed of what's going on in their lives. Teach them stories about, even as hard as it is to deal with stories about young people like we have with Mallory Rose, teach them those stories, show them those stories, have parents share their experience, what happened when their teen was cyberbullied, or what happened when they found out their young person or their son or daughter were being the cyberbullies. Those type of stories really help us be able to digest and reflect on what's happening in our lives. You teach for transformation, right? You're not just going to teach about cyberbullying and what cyberbullying is, but teach for people to be changed and truly transformed by it. And that's what Christ did, right? Again, he taught us a huge amount of information, right, from God. And he taught us all these different things, but he didn't just throw it at us and run out of the room. He accompanied us and he stuck with it. And he said, I'm going to transform you. Your life is never going to be the same. And so opening up the windows and looking at different ways of cyberbullying is going to offer opportunities for us to really transform the digital lives of those who we encounter. Do not water down the teachings. One of my pet peeves of faith formation and working as a lay minister in the church is that in our constant yearning to make everything relative is that we've really watered down theological teaching. I think it's really, really important that we give it to them as it is. For example, cyberbullying. It's wrong. It's always wrong. It's an evil act, right? And we get down to the dignity of persons and you teach it how it is, like how it really, really is. I think it's really, really important that we do that. We don't water it down. We don't say, oh, it's okay if you do this, or it's okay if you do that. We need to really be forefronted and say, no, it's never okay to treat somebody less than, right? And to get back to that human dignity, to be like Christ and be bold in doing and teaching our teachings and sharing the faith. Also be a servant leader, to go in and serve and to, it's like the foot washing, the beautiful scenes that we have with the foot washing of being that servant leader and caring for those who we serve. Going back into the trenches, living in that digital space and serving in the ways that you can. When you see cyberbullying happening, whether you see a victim or you see someone doing it, calling them out and be a servant to the community and making sure that the community is healed from it. Another big thing is to love young people as they are, and you can also say love adults as they are. They're not perfect, right? Cyberbullies, right? And I know it's hard to love those who hurt us. It's hard to love those who hurt the people in our community, but we have to love them anyway, and we're instructed by Christ to love them anyway. We're instructed to love them and to be a part of their lives and to walk with them and even through the valleys of sin in order to show them a new life and a new beginning. So when you're working with those who are bullies or who are cyberbullied, going to those valleys of despair and loving them as they are and where they are is going to be instrumental in their formation and finding a new digital life. So in all this, in teaching like Jesus, and I have a quote for each one of these, it's really to make the rightful due is to treat each other as human dignity. A person's rightful due is to be treated as an object of love, not as an object for use. And that is at the fundamental core of what we're doing in our transformational teaching and getting and showing young people, adults, even young children on how to be good digital disciples. So moving forward, the next thing is preach like a disciple. And a lot of this I'm sure you've heard before. At first, you have to deepen your own faith. How much do you know about the church teaching, about slander, right? How much do you know about thou shalt not lie, right? Or thou shalt not put slanderous message out on the internet for anyone to see, right? If you ever look at St. Thomas Aquinas and is actually in a Summa, he actually talks about backbiting, which is really fun and interesting to look at, and how we should avoid what he calls backbiting, which is gossip at the age between the kings and the queens and things like that. And he spent a considerable amount of time talking about this backbiting. And so that's deepening your faith and getting down into those we have really rich traditions in our faith about bullies and not cyberbullies, but bullies. If you look at the Old Testament and the Psalms and the Lamentations, right, and the Israelites, they were bullied, right? It sounds so simplistic, but bullying has always been around. So diving into the scriptures and the early church teachings can really help deepen your own faith so you too can go out and preach it to the masses. The next thing is building relationships. If you've read anything recently of the Christus Vivit and the Youth Synod, we've talked a great deal, and Pope Francis has really run with this pontificate, is accompaniment and mentoring. And again, this doesn't just happen with young adults or even young children, but it can happen all the way up to adult faith formation, and I think it's important to point that out, because, right, the bullies and the bullied are not just young people. I've seen adults do it back and forth too, and I'm sure you have too. So we need to accompany each other in this digital way, right? Walk with each other, hold each other accountable to what's happening in our digital lives, and making these different ways, showing people what's good and what's bad online, mentoring them, talking about it in open spaces, and just being really good digital citizens ourselves, and building those relationships, those one-on-one relationships are essential to the core of guiding people to good digital thinking. So the next thing is, and I really like this, is answer questions with questions. And Matthew, we hear this, the disciples, as Jesus taught us, disciples say, who do you say that I am, right? They ask, well, who are you, Jesus? And he goes, well, who do you say that I am, right? And I think that's kind of a fun way to banter. If you think about when you encounter cyberbullying or if you encounter the cyberbullied, and you think about what's happening there, it goes back to the question is never the question. Ask them, why are you bullying, right? And we saw one example earlier from the bully, and he said, I'm not sure why I did it. Well, keep asking him. It was like, well, I'm a bully. Well, why do you do that? Why do you say those things? Why do you think it's appropriate to talk that way to people online? All right, who do you say you are when you say those different things? Ask young people that too, and ask the victims. You can ask them, well, how does that make you feel? What's going on? Are you okay? Is everything okay with you? Those questions are fundamental in guiding people back to the faith, right? It helps them sort of relate themselves and see that they're not alone. Again, going back to accompaniment and building those relationships are very helpful through the questioning. We already talked about this one, but again, I said I'm going to emphasize this over and over. You have to show them how. And it's not just teaching them about cyberbullying, about trolling and those different types of things. You have to show them how. Get onto those digital spaces and show them what healthy digital lives look like. So with that, you also have to be open to technology and the tools of using it. Think about your ministry. And think about how you currently use the tools that you do. And in ancient times, the disciples used whatever tools that they could get their hands on in order to spread the faith. Think about St. Paul, for example. When he wrote all his letters to the various different early Christian communities, he actually would use imagery and things like that from paganism in order to really hone in on different messages. He would use imagery about what was happening in these communities in order to explain the faith. We have to do the same thing with digital tools. If we're going to talk about the dignity of human persons, we should be using digital tools to show that it's not just here in the flesh, but it's also further out into digital space, that we don't just stop Christian living on this side of the screen, that it actually goes up further onto the other side of the screen as well. And so using those digital tools, think about how you use digital tools in your own faith formation. Sure, you're going to have websites, you're going to have social media, you're going to have podcasts and do all those different types of things. But do you ever really have, formation or training opportunities? Or do you just throw those out there for people just to sort of, take in, but not really use yourself? Like, for example, do you just throw things out on social media to share what's the latest happening on the local parish circuit? Or do you actually go in there and have good, healthy conversations with people? That's really important, right? So the showing how takes it that step further, where you can kind of show how to use these tools to create constructive dialogue between people. You can do I can go all day about this. So you can do various different things. You can do newsletters. You can go in and have conversations, post thought-provoking questions, and have, engagement and dialogue and back and forth through that. That's using digital tools and not being a passive reception of them. And that also teaches cyberbullies and the cyberbullied that there is a healthy way or healthy relationship within those tools. The next thing is trust the Holy Spirit. Sometimes I think and I don't think I know. I know in our discourse, and especially in the Catholic faith, is that I don't know if we all try to be control freaks in our ministry. Some of us are, or what it is that we just have to trust the Holy Spirit's guide. There are a lot of prayers that you can actually tap into. You can Google them online. Prayer before I go into the internet, things like that. Prayer so I don't see bad things on the internet. All those different types of things. They may sound silly, and this is going to segue into Pray Like the Saints, but they're very, very helpful at helping the Holy Spirit guide us, right? The disciples, if you think about the early church, they were going around and preaching and teaching and living this really crazy time where at any moment, and many of them could be martyred, right? And they could just be thrown to the wolves. And so, yet they did it with courageously, and they were going out and doing all these really great things because they allowed the Holy Spirit guide them, right? They received the Holy Spirit at Pentecost. They were given this really great gift, and they just had this courageous nature about them to go out and to preach to the masses. We have to be brave too. We need to stop shying away from the issue, right? Sometimes we don't want to talk about cyberbullying, what's really happening online when it comes to cyberbullying or sexting and things like that, because it's uncomfortable. Holy Spirit guide you. You're going to get the right answers at the right time, and you're going to find the right way in order to introduce this type of stuff into your context and be the person who the church needs you to be as a ministerial leader, and also be the person for the people in front of you who they need to be as well. You just have to trust the Holy Spirit to guide you. The next thing that kind of segues into this is do God's digital will. Drop the net is a really great sort of an idea, thought from this. Sherry Burdell wrote this in her discipleship book, and if you haven't read that, please do. It's great. So drop the net, it means that there's really, really broadcasting of how do we get out there and actually do God's will, right? It's like we're going to just drop the net and follow him and be intentional disciples, right? And that's what we need to do. We need to really hone in and pray, go back to the scriptures, go back to the great things, and look at the stories of those who've been bullied and cyberbullied, and go back to those who were bullied in the Old Testament, and even in the New Testament, and the early Christians, and all the saints and the martyrs, and all the people who came from there, and think about them, and use those stories to do God's will. They're going to show you how. You just have to go back and reclaim that, and reclaim that history, and reclaim those thought-provoking moments in our Christian history. So being a disciple means being constantly ready to bring the love of Jesus to others, and this can happen unexpectedly and in any place, on the street, at a city square, during work, or on a journey. So don't forget that sharing God's word can happen in digital spaces, right? I'm not saying that you have to go on to your Facebook page and say, I'm going to promote all these different things from here, from there, from all, like here's the new Bible verse of the day. Just be a good, human, decent person on the screen, right? Go in there, and if you see someone being bullied, be a disciple and call them out, right? And say, hey, even if you don't want to do it publicly, call out that person and say, hey, I saw you mention this. Send them a direct message or a DM and say, I saw you say this. Do you know that that's not really appropriate? Here's a better way to do it, is share a message from Christ and that conversation. Or you can do it publicly. Sometimes that's what you need to do to call people out in order for them to change, or at least take note of what needs to happen to change. But it happens everywhere, right? It's not just, and I think that's something we've forgotten as a human society, is that we are not just Christian on this side of the screen, but when we log in, we don't set down our Christian persona and put on a different face, and many of us have. Right, and I see it all the time. I see even bishops and priests who say awful things to each other online, or even nuns, or even really good people who I thought were Catholic. Oftentimes, yes, they come back and they apologize and they make a public statement about it. But the fact that they're even doing that, something's happening when we're logging on, and we're forgetting that we're no longer disciples when we get into those digital spaces. We have to remember that, because the young people are watching us, right? Other adults are watching us. And they learn from that. They learn what's proper behavior from that. And so to be a good digital disciple is to be a disciple in all places at all times. So the next thing is pray like the saints. And I know you may think, well, this is weird, right? It's like, of course we're going to pray. But I don't think that we pray enough. And when it comes to digital spaces and protecting ourselves, right? And saying, like, for example, saying the prayer of St. Michael could be quite incredibly inspirational for someone who has to do those battles online and things like that, or who encounters cyberbullying. We need to remember to pray. I think, when we talk about digital space, and I thought about this a lot, right? This is not something I just came up with in 10 minutes. It's like I keep going back and forth with this. And I even call myself out on this, is how often do I pray before I log on? To be completely honest, very rarely, right? I mean, we're logging on so fast, right? So when I'm picking up the kids in the carpool line, I pick up the phone, I'm logging into the internet, looking, scrolling through Twitter, whatever, looking at the news, not even thinking about spiritually preparing myself. So I think prayer is an underused tool when it comes to protecting ourselves and helping the cyberbullied and the cyberbullies to protect themselves as well from those digital spaces and what harm. So the very first thing we can do is pray for victims and bullies. Right? I think it's really, really important to openly share our prayers for those who cause harm, that they find new ways, they find direction, that they find God, right? If you are familiar with the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we had a really, really bad instance where a police officer shot and killed a man after she walked into an apartment, and it was a mistaken identity where she claims that she didn't know that it was not her apartment. And so it was a terrible, terrible thing. And so they went through the trial, and she was convicted of murder. And so she was, during her sentencing phase, when the victims' families had their right to statement to the court, brother of both from John, who was this young man killed, the young brother of him actually got up and he gave this really, if you haven't seen it, Google it. You can email me. I'll send it to you. A really beautiful statement on love and forgiveness. And at the end of that statement, he said, I want to pray for you, right? And he said, he goes, I can't be angry anymore. I can't do this anymore. He's like, there's only one thing I want you. And this is what he said to the officer that killed his brother. He's like, I just want you to know Jesus, right? And so this is a beautiful example of what happens and the power that prayer has on not only those who are victims, but those who commit crimes or sins, I should say, who commit sins against other people. And I think we don't do that enough publicly. Pray for the bullies, right? And live teen night, pray for the bullies. Make it a point to pray for them and to pray to change for them, because it's a very powerful testament of love and human dignity to the rest of the world. And you have to pray with humility, right? And so when you're praying for others and you're showing this as an example, you're not standing on the pedestal like, well, I'm praying for them because I'm better than them, right? I'm praying for them because I don't care what they do. I'm praying for them because I'm the Pharisee and I have all knowledge and things like that. That's not what I mean by showing prayer. Is you humble yourself and you say, I want them to be part of this greater picture of God's love, and you use that as an opportunity to draw those bullies back into the greater world of Christ. You pray for enlightenment. Again, when I log on, when I walk into my office in the morning, I click, boom, I'm on, right? It's rare that I even think, maybe not even think it even a split second about what I may or may not encounter when I log in online, doing research or looking at, Facebook page, whatever it is. But can be very powerful to start that daily habit of prayer before you log on. It can be in the morning. In the morning, you may already say prayers to help protect you from harm's way. But teach that to other people and I think one of the things that's very important about this, and one thing that I've landed on time and time again, is when talking to young people, especially, and young adults, is that I ask them, one of the questions I ask them, do you even think about God when you log onto the internet? The looks on their faces was like, I've never even thought about that, right? And it was kind of appalling and kind of interesting at the same time to get that insight. And I was like, so let's run with that. So when you log into the internet, do you even think about how your faith is influencing you, or do you think about God watching you? And 100% of them said, absolutely not. I never even think about God in that. And I think praying for enlightenment will help us make those godly connections to what we do online. Pray in all spaces, digital or not, to be able to show. Be joyful. The saints are joyful. They pray with joy. We don't have to go online and be like these crazy radicals who are out there with our pitchforks and, flames of burning and going out there and saying, oh, you're a cyberbully. Oh, stop that. You can't say that. And that's not what I'm saying at all. There's such a great, incredible joy of the gospel message and sharing this idea that we love each other for the sake that we are just human beings created by God. And so when you're encountering online and you're doing these prayer and you're teaching people about how to be good online, the cyberbullies need to see it to be joyful. As we saw in the first example, we did it for laughs, right? Kids and even adults are just looking to be happy and joyful and to find, humor in everyday spaces. It's just part of human life. It's kind of fun. It makes things a little easier in life when we're joyful. And so being a joyful digital disciple and showing that this stuff is not hard, and it's actually when you're good online and you're being healthy, building these healthy relationships online and things like that, and showing that you're joyful is actually a really great way to show that this is a better life than actually being that awful, terrible human being of a bully. Be bold. Our saints are bold in their prayer, and they're bold people. Again, it goes back to, as Christ being bold, call people out, right? Don't be shy away from calling cyberbullying for what it is. Boldly proclaim the gospel message through your deeds and actions online, and show people how to do it as well. And it also takes a lot of bravery. I cannot emphasize this enough. I know it's incredibly hard to call people out on what's happening in the digital space. I've seen times when I've had former students who got into banter with each other, and it did get elevated to one was cyberbullying the other. And I should have stepped in, and I didn't. And I should have, and I didn't. And because I lacked the bravery, I wish I could go back in time and go back and call that young person out. Luckily, it sort of just ended on its own. But it takes an incredible amount of bravery to step out of our comfort zones and to call cyberbullies out and to have those conversations with them and teaching them. But you can do it, right? And we have the wisdoms. We have all these things that we can help us. We have great tools as lay ministers that can help us do these things. So be brave. Be brave in the scared, be brave in the sacred. It takes a lot of work, but the saints give us a lot of insights on how to do that. And again, I go back and I will go back over and over, is trust God's will. As the saints say, it's like when we're praying and we're forming these and you can think about healing prayers and things like that, and all these different things. When you pray in these communities, trust God's will at work. Sometimes you have to do your best and know that your best was done, and there's nothing more you can do, and you just got to let God take the rest. Because we're only human, right? We can't work the miracles of God, and sometimes we have to let God just be God and do His will. So we end with this quote in this section: "Sanctity is not rigid like cardboard. It knows how to smile, to give way to others, and to hops. It is a life, a supernatural life." Right? And it's a really great way to think about, is to be brave, to be saintly, and to pray. Now, of course, you're like, okay, Dr. Hunt, tell me what's new, right? I have all these tools and insights of why I should be doing this and what ideas of what, but where do you go from here, right? How might your ministry help cyberbully victims and their cyberbullies? So where's some of the practical tools, Dr. Hunt, that we could possibly do? And I'm going to give you some insights. So here are some just practical ideas that I've used along my way. I've done these as a consultant with high schoolers. I've done them with adult faith formation. I've worked with parents. I've worked with students. And these things seem to be at least getting the conversation starting, at least to dive deeper into the issue of cyberbullying, being cyberbullied, and to help, lay ministry sort of make that connection on the importance of teaching about digital discipleship in these spaces. The first thing is foster dialogue. Now, dialogue is not teaching. Right? It's not teaching. Dialogue is just coming to a better understanding of what's happening. So have group circles break out, allow people to speak, allow young people to share their voice about what's really going on, and they will. Silent and just shut up and let them speak. They're going to tell you a great deal. If you ask parents to sit around and just talk to each other and engage each other in dialogue with culture, have young people speak to parents, foster dialogues between parents and young people, have people who claim that they've been bullying victims speak to bullies, have them sit at a table together, and I know it takes bravery, have them sit at a table together and say, okay, bullies and bullying victims, I want you to come together and I want you to speak to each other. And you're not going to debate. You're not going to make excuses as to why you did one thing or not do another thing. You're just going to understand about each other's lives. And that could foster a whole new understanding of a person's dignity and help foster a really deeper understanding of, that roots that we got to of why it's happening. And that could help people really change their minds in terms of why they're bullying and why they become a victim. The next thing is explore the bullying of the Israelites. I talked about this earlier. I don't think we explore that enough, right? We talk about what happened in the Old Testament and the foreshadowing to come in the New Testament. We break it all down, but really get at the core of bullying. I think adults and young people need to know that this is not a new revolutionary problem. And the only thing that's changed is now we do it digitally, and now we can't get away from it. But go back to the Israelites. They never forgot to trust God. They never forgot it, and they never stopped trusting God, despite the horrendous bullying they had. And as they wandered through the desert, as they were, slaves in Egypt and things like that, they never stopped trusting God. And we have to remember that. And our victims need to remember that, is that there's a whole tradition there to give them guidance and hope, and absolute hope, and things that are to come as they work through what's happening in their own lives. And we also need to offer special talks and resources for parents and even adults. Let's say not even those who are not parents. I know sometimes as completely, even as much as I research this, when it comes down to actually doing, I feel under resourced because I don't fully understand the teenager, right? The middle school age terrifies me because of all the emotional things that I know that are in store, and that I can't prevent from happening in the lives of my children. So it's talking to other parents and fostering that dialogue is really, really important. Um, Again, use social media in ministry. I talked a great deal about also, and I didn't go into the psychological part of this, but really knowing your audience, host opportunities to talk about mental health awareness when you're talking to your parents. Host opportunities for you because a large number of times with cyberbullies and cyberbully victims, usually there has been, and this has been proven by research, is that there's some underlying issue. It could be a anxiety disorder. It could be that bipolar. It could be something, as extreme as bipolarism, or it could be something as small as just somebody has high level anxiety and how to control that anxiety yet. But have those conversations with parents about mental illness, about what's happening with our young people and the high level of stress. Because those high levels of stress and anxiety really feeds into how people behave digitally online. Bullies, I didn't go into that, I don't have time, but bullies tend to attack other people. A lot of that comes misfired because they don't know how else to use that energy. And so a lot of this time that we're talking about parents, it's not just letting them know about use this digital device, don't use this, don't let your kids up here, but to really get down to the root and core what's happening in young people's lives because it's vastly different than what happened 20 years ago. Use social media again in your ministry. And lastly, ask youth in your parents, youth in your parish, youth in your young adult ministry, ask adults, right? Again, adult faith formation classes, RCA, whatever they are. It's what's going on, right? Ask them. They'll tell you. And finally, again, is put away your tablet. Yes, really. I cannot emphasize this enough is that I think one of the greatest tools I have on my phone is that it gives me a weekly report about how often I'm online. And I'm always constantly trying to hit the number lower than it was the week before. A good week for me is when I've been able to get it lower than 20% the week before. Sometimes it's quite high because I spend a lot of time traveling one week and I may be on the phone a lot for that reason. But look at how you're using your digital devices. When you get home, put the phone down, right? When you're in your ministry, keep the phone in the back pocket and only pick it up when you get a text or a phone call. Showing those the type of things and that we can have those human encounters and those relationships is essential and important in order to have healthy digital spaces. When you show how to have a healthy digital life, you have absolute control over how to form cyberbullying victims and showing them great hope and healthy relationships and showing the cyberbullies on how to do things well on digital spaces. So with that, I thank you, and I'll open the floor for any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Jodi. And as you mentioned, this is now your opportunity to send in questions. Um, you hit upon so many things that really get us thinking. And I already have a question here from Crystal. She asks, is bullying more dominant in middle school or high school?
Definitely middle school. And I was actually surprised by that. I had actually when I entered, and I've done a few interviews, about 10 of them now. When I first went in, I thought that the high schoolers, because they have so much more digital freedom than the middle schoolers, but my middle schoolers and even the high schoolers told me is that when they were in middle school, it was heightened to a really high level. I think that there's a lot of things happening in middle school with emotions and hormones and all that comes into play. Middle school is a really weird transition period even in spiritual life, we're seeing that young people disaffiliate around middle school age. So it's a really trying time, that pressure and the stress. So definitely keep an eye on your middle schoolers. That's when they're going to encounter it. I was told by the high schoolers it does get better in high school and it becomes more one-on-one interactions, usually because, and the bullying in high school tends to happen from relationships that don't pan out, whether it's boyfriend girlfriend relationships or just friends who decide to break apart for whatever reason. But that's really important, and that's a good question. But middle school absolutely heightens 100%. It's crazy some of the things I heard middle schoolers talk about.
Okay, well, that's positive, at least that it gets better,
Yeah.
right? Tina said, thank you for addressing this important topic. Um, Laura asks, what are some places to get people in to talk to families? Where are some places to get people in to talk to families?
Sure. So, if you're close by to a college, as professors, we love to talk, right? I mean, we do. I mean, there's so many of us who work in the Ivory Tower who have really great access to, psychological resources. We understand from our research and things like that, how young people are formed, how to tell parents how do you know that your kids are depressed or being bullied and things like that. Ask local school counselors, ask people who are involved, ask around the spaces and look for people that have gone through it. Right, I think parents or adults or even young people who are willing and open to share their story have powerful messages, and they can give you really great insights on what to expect from someone who's been a bully or who's been cyberbullied. Your diocese should have access to resources, but I know dioceses always don't. Um, but I know, like I said, I know several teachers and professors that would be happy to Skype in and to share those resources and to have all those one-on-one. And don't be afraid to ask them either. There's a lot. There's also things like there's the Cyberbullying Institute. I don't know the exact name off my. They have a great. If you just Google Cyberbullying Institute, they have a great wealth of information, and they share stories that can at least get the conversation going. If you can't find the right person to come in.
Great, thank you. Ada asks, use social media to teach. I think she wants maybe more ideas or explanation of how to use social media in your ministry.
Sure. I would say one thing that I found helpful is that post questions, like you can create a special social media page for a specific group within your parish, or you can do it within Flock Notes or some of the other My Parish apps and things like that. And create discussion forums. So you can post a question of the week and ask people to engage in those questions. And that can help foster a dialogue from different people, from whoever you accept in the community, or if you want to keep it open to the wider web. You can use Snapchat, right? And of course, you have to be careful. Whenever you use social media in your ministry, be sure to in regards to safe environment. I know every diocese is different, every context is different, every school is different. They're going to have very strict rules on how you engage with young people and minors online. With adults, it's a little easier, but be sure you're also working with those bounds. Post videos, post helps and hit. Make a video of yourself and post it online. Create your own YouTube channel and have people, go in and comment and things like that. But those are really great ways to flip the classroom. If you're working with young people, for example, and you're going to have a great lesson on human dignity, post a video of you sharing a story of something you've encountered of being bullied. Have them watch it, right? And then you guys talk about it when you get in the classroom. There's a huge way to get them to use social media tools where you can monitor them on how to use it, to where you're teaching them healthy digital relationships and forming those relationships through dialogue.
Great, thank you. I can imagine that you have heard a young person say, well, I was just joking,
Yeah. Oh
right?
yeah. Oh yeah.
Catherine asks, how do you address that in an effective way?
Sure. You first of all is to use stories. Is to go back to those stories and say, I'm sure these kids thought they were just joking too, and look what happened, right? They were not to use a cliche, but they were the straw who broke the camel's back, right? Is like that it really we had to talk to, and we had to be serious in our tone. It's the father figure, the mother figure, is to get down to their level and say, I'm sure those kids thought they were joking too. But you say the wrong thing to the person on the wrong day, that could be the final straw for them, and they could go home and create great harm to themselves, right? And you don't want to be the person who did that. So, joking or not, there's certain things that should not be said, and just be direct with them, right? But use those stories to say that. It really is just one word, one instance that can really break a person, and so we have to be so cognitively aware that not everything's a joke, and saying hurtful things is not funny.
Absolutely. Mary Grace says, in your experience, have anti-bully programs been effective tools to make young people aware of the danger of cyberbullying and providing coping skills?
Right. There hasn't been any research that's come in and said yes or no. I would say that and I will speak from my teacher side and from what I saw when I was working in high schools, I think they can be helpful in at least getting awareness. But I do think that sometimes they become cliche and kind of made fun of by young people. It's like, oh, you're cyber. They're always pointing the finger. You're a cyberbully. You're a cyberbully. Even my young son went through that cyberbully, which is a bullying program at his one of his Catholic schools. And after the second or third time he heard it became almost a joke to him. And so I had to sort of say, this is not a joke. This is why you're doing it, and things like that. So use them, but use them sparingly. I think we could be, programs are great, but we shouldn't have to use them over and over, the same speakers over and over again. I think that one of the most effective tools on how to teach young people to cope, if you're dealing in that, is have them speak to each other. Is really divide them up and have people who have been bullies or who are willing to share their stories and to share what they experience, and have those who are bullies share their stories and experiences and have them talk to each other. That's far more effective than me getting up and telling young people not to do it.
Most definitely. Well, thank you so much, Jodi. You have given us,
Sure,
as I
thank
said,
you.
a lot to reflect on, and really practical tools to apply to our ministry, which we always appreciate. As I mentioned earlier, the webinar is being recorded. You all will receive a link to that tomorrow in an email. I will also include that if you're interested in getting this PowerPoint, Jodi has been gracious to share it with us, so you can send me an email and I will send that to you. Please join us next week. Rosie Schover will speak about accompanying and formation of young adult missionary disciples. So thank you all. Have a great day, and we'll see you next week. Thanks again,
Thank
Jodi.
you. My pleasure. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.